I took out my notes from last year, Parshas Ba'aloischa. I got 6 pages of notes. I looked up a million Mefarshim. Today's class is no Mefarshim, just Rashi. I would say most candidly that tonight's class is based on a Maimah that I learned this past Shabbos more than anything else. I'll tell you what my topic is straight up. My topic is, what did Merari do wrong to be considered second class? Who is worried about Merari? Huh? You learn Parshas Bamidbar, it says Nosei es Reish b'nei Kahos. You start Parshas Nosei, it says Nosei es Reish b'nei Gershom gam heim. What about Merari? Nope, their heads do not get lifted, it just says Livnei Merari. INF, it's not fair, right? Hashem gave Kahos a better job, so he's giving them extra. I guess Kahos is entitled to extra koiches. But why is Merari not entitled to Nesias Reish? This is issue numero uno. But in this week's parsha, you have another thing. One of the most under-observed stories in the entire Chumash. I spoke about this last year at length, because it's something that always intrigued me, and I don't remember what I said, but I could see from my notes, I worked very hard on the class. There's a whole ceremony that initiates B'nai Levi. Just like there's a whole ceremony which initiates B'nai Aaron, the ceremony which initiates B'nai Aaron is twice in the Chumash. The instructions are in Parshas Tetzaveh, and the execution of it is in Parshas Tzav. The whole series of what's called Meshicha, L'moshcha Behem, to make them into Koyanim, a whole series of things were done to make Koyanim into Koyanim. In our Parsha, you have a section. It starts almost it's the 5th pasuk in the Parsha. All of yesterday's Chitas, except for the first 4 psukim, plus I guess all of today's Chitas is about Levi. That Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu to take the Leviim instead of the Bechayrim and to appoint them as the assistants to the Kohanim. So what does it say? That there were 3 things that needed to be done with them. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu selected them. What does Rashi say? Does anybody remember? Moshe Midon, pasuk Chaf, Rashi, today's Chitas. Moshe Midon, Aaron Hanifam, and Yisrael Somuch as Moshe stood up, all the Bnei Levi, about 6,500 men. Aaron lifted up every single kohen. I remember as a child, I remember learning about Bamidbar in the 5th grade. I remember my teacher describing how Aaron had to lift up 6,000 kohenim. I mean, maybe they jumped with him, but you know what it means to lift up 6,000 kohenim? 6,000 men one after the other in a day. And the Yidden had to lean their hands on the Leviim. There were more Yidden than the Leviim. I don't know if every single Jew needed to lean on every single Levi, but Aaron had to lift up each Levi. So here again, Rashi has the same thing. That by Kahos it says, V'heinif adnes ha-Leviim tnufa lifnei Hashem, me'ez b'nei Yisrael, v'hoyu l'avodas Hashem. That Aaron lifts up the Leviim, this goes on Kahos. He lifts them up for Hashem from the Jewish people because they're going to serve the Avodas Hashem. What does it say by Gershom? V'heinafta oisam tnufa l'havaya. Here it is again. Hashem's name. That Aaron lifts them up to Hashem. What does it say by Merari? V'heinafta oisam tnufa. Lift them up. Merari is not entitled to be in Parshas Nosei, last week's Parsha. Merari is not entitled to be Nesias Reish, to have his head lifted. And in our Parsha, when Aaron lifts up Kahos, it's for serving Hashem. When Aaron lifts up Gershom, it's for serving Hashem, and when Aaron lifts up Merari, it's for lifting him up. It's not fair. INF. It's not fair. It's taken not fair. What did Merari do? There's no record that Merari having done anything wrong. Hashem chose Kahos. That's it. Hashem chose Kahos. Now Kahos was a pretty cool guy. You know why Kahos was a pretty cool guy? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was his grandson. Aaron HaKohen was his grandson. This was mamish, the intimate family of Moshe Rabbeinu. Kahos was closest. That's why Korach are all upset, because Korach was also from the family of Kahos, and he felt like he wasn't being given the same treatment as the others, that he was entitled. Yeah, but Hagufa Kasha. Hashem chose Kahos to be superior, to be supreme. And Gershom is superior and supreme Gamheim, as secondary to Kahos. Merari, nope, Merari is not supreme. Why? How does this work? Now, of course, the beginning of the answer to this question is something that I say often, that I believe is very, very important to be said. It's very, very important to be said. And the truth of the matter is, you can make the case that this is the story of Parshas Korach. We live in America. This is just a short parenthetical thought. I've said this many times before in my Pasha classes. We live in America. America believes in fairness. At least that's what they say. It has to be fair. If it's not fair, it's not good. So if there's a disadvantaged person, you have to make it fair. By however you even the score, you make it fair. It has to be fair. Now, what is the correct word? What is the correct English word? What is the correct word from a more philosophical angle for things being equal, for things being fair? The correct word is parity. Parity means everything is the same, like everything is on par. The word on par is the word parity. Everything is the same. Nobody has an advantage over somebody else. Now, the simple fact is, the statement is, parity is a lie. It's not true. There's no parity. There's no parity in Hashem's world. If you want to speak about it politically, right, who believed in parity? The communists believe in parity. Who believed in disparity, that people are not equal? Us, the capitalists, the chazerim, right? The people who want to be rich. There's rich and there's poor. Now, what is the fact of life? That in a civilization where people lived in parity, the rich were poorer than in a civilization where they did not live in parity, where the poor are richer. It's ironic. Right? I grew up during the Cold War. They used to show the difference between a supermarket in the West, a supermarket in the East, a street sign, an apartment. Everything was depressing, dreary, drab, heavy, small. And in the West, everything is so free, and so, especially in America. So the fact is that it feels good to say everyone should be the same. It's not the way of the world. It's just not true. I've told this to you before that I heard from somebody once that the Rebbe wrote in a letter. He was asked whether, in theory, communism, socialism is a good political system. You have to remember, the problem we have with communism is not their financial beliefs. The problem we have with communism is, for whatever reason, and there's really no good reason why, the communists decided to kill God along with killing the bourgeois, along with killing the elite, the royal class. They decided to kill God. There was absolutely no need to do that. If the communists had just left God out of the equation, let Goyim be religious, let Yidden Lahavim be religious, and just gone after the financial systems, we would have been poor, but okay, we've been poor before. But somebody once asked the Rebbe, that's what I heard, I didn't see the letter, about what he believed about socialism and communism, and the Rebbe said it's fundamentally wrong. Because for any civilization to survive, there needs to be competition. There needs to be competition. What's the root of competition? A very ugly word. What's the root of competition? Jealousy. You have, I want. It's midas reis, right? But it says in Torah, the Rebbe quoted 1,000 times, Kina seifrin tarba chochma. When you go on shlichus and the shliach who lives a town over has a bigger building and more people, and you're jealous, and that jealousy translates into you working harder. It's an ugly midah. Kina is it's part of the eish. It's very close to kas, very close to anger, but it motivates. So this is what I heard, that the Rebbe wrote, without competition, societies fail. Things were never meant to be equal. I mentioned this to the class I gave the other night, that at the moment of the Big Bang, there was an equal amount of matter and antimatter. And if that had remained the constant, the universe would have been destroyed before it was created. In order for there to be a world, there cannot be balance. There had to be a preponderance of matter and a very, very small amount of antimatter. I think physicists do not understand how this process unfolded, but if all of the matter, antimatter, which was radiated from the Big Bang, would have remained, they would have canceled each other with no universe. Finished. Balance is unsustainable. It's very, very, what I'm saying is very politically incorrect, because the social belief is everything has to be equal. You have to make it fair, you have to make it equal. And I don't really follow politics, and some people say I should, but it's getting worse over time. This whole idea that we have to figure out a way of making it fair and equal. And of course, when you make things fair, what you do is you dumb everything down, right? If this dumbest person gets 100 on a test, everybody's good. But that's not how civilizations work. There needs to be kids who get hundreds and kids who get 66s. I once knew a doctor, it was Allah B'lichting Gan Eden, who said to me, there's a doctor that you're going to visit who got a 66 on his exams. He passed by the Erev as chinny chin chin, and he's taking care of you. The competition is very important. It's necessary. And in everything in life, and therefore everything in Torah, this is played out. For example, A human being is not made up of 248 heads. You have one head and 2 eyes and 2 nostrils and 2 ears and a mouth and a tongue and a heart and 2 lungs and a liver and kidneys and a spleen and the rest. You have different parts, right? So Rachmanis on your toe. Why should your toe be a toe? Let your toe be the head and the head be the toe. What's the answer? It's not fair. The Eibusher did not make a fair world. The Eibusher made a functional world. What makes it fair is, as the famous expression from Reb Zusha, nobody is going to hold it against you for not being Avraham Avinu, but they're certainly going to hold it against you for not being Zusha. No one's going to hold it against Yossi Paltiel for not being some other big chassid, but what I am able to do, I must do, and if I don't do, it's going to be held against me. That's where the fairness is. The fairness is not in sameness. The fairness is each person is judged himself, but there is not balance. And this plays itself out in the story of Kairach. Right? What does Kairach scream? Why should only Adam be Kohen Gadol? I would have been Kohen Gadol too. Anybody who wants to be Kohen Gadol. And Moshe Rabbeinu tells him, no, Kohen Gadol Echad, only one Kohen Gadol. And the same is true here. First of all, the idea that Hashem separates Kohanim is already not fair. Second of all, after he separates Kohanim, he separates Leviim, and the Leviim take the place of the Bechayrim, who had worshipped the golden calf and they lost their rights as the priests. Leviim take their place. His rights are not fair. And then when he splits up the Leviim into families, one family is Kahas, they're the greatest of the great. The second family is Gershom, so we like them also. And then there's Merari. Who cares about Merari? And Merari, by the way, had the hardest job. They had to carry the lumber. They had to carry the heaviest part of the Beis HaMikdash. But they're not Nosei Yisroish, and they're not Trufala Avaya, they're just Merari. And that's how it is. In other words, on some level, the question is an answer. Hashem did not create the world. The world should be the same. Now, if you're a member of Shevet Merari and you feel cheated, so the teretz is, Hashem gave you a different shlichus, a different job. Hashem gave you different koiches. The best you need to be is the best you. You don't be somebody else. And that's good enough. And when a person wants to be what somebody else is destined to be, then they end up not being that other person, end up not being themselves. It's a disaster. But it still hurts, right? It still hurts, right? In America, it hurts. One of the best examples of this, I knew a man many, many years ago who was in a wheelchair. And his whole shita in life was, I'm not an invalid. I couldn't walk. I'm not a cripple. I'm normal, different. And he had his whole philosophy. If you would meet him, you got his philosophy. If you ever asked him a question, you got the philosophy again. He had a whole shita. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm just like anybody else, but I'm normal, different. In Torah, it's not that way. In Torah, it's not that way. Why not? A person who's a Balbum can't serve in the Beis HaMikdash. An animal that's a Balbum is not kosher for a carbon. It's not fair. It isn't fair. But the yesod of it is, the foundation of the thing is that the Eibishter did not make things for Hashem, made everything to have a different purpose. Having said that, okay, now I just gave you sort of a basic introduction. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about Kahas. Let's talk about Gershom, and let's talk about Merari, and let's flush out why is it that Gershom does not have his head lifted? Why is it that when Merari doesn't have his head lifted in Pashas Nosei last week, and in this week's Pasha, when Aaron HaKohen is lifting up the Leviim one by one, the Bnei Kahas, he lifts up Laved Avedas Hashem, Bnei Gershom lifts up Lifnei Hashem, and Merari he just lifts them up. And maybe we can flush out actually a Maila. In other words, what we'll do is, we'll have this conversation, and we'll see if we can spin it so that Merari will end up having a Maila that Kahas and Gershom do not have. And the way I'm presenting this to you is I'm going to be sharing with you what Chassidus says. What does Chassidus say about Kahas? What does Chassidus say about Gershom? Basically, it says about Kahas that Kahas is Torah, and Gershom is mitzvahs. In a Maimer that I learned this Shabbos in the Oyel, the Rebbe said that Kahas is mitzvah saseh and Gershom is mitzvah leisaseh. Kahas is mitzvah saseh, Gershom is mitzvah leisaseh, Kahas is also Torah. In Chassidus and Tanya you have that the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people has 3 levels. One level of the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people is called a hug, an embrace. What happens when you hold a person, when you embrace a person? When you put your hands around a person and you hold him and he puts his hands around you and he holds you. So one of the observations is made that the hands go behind the back. You're facing each other, and when you embrace, you put your hands behind his back, meaning That the embrace does not only involve the part of the person, which is the face of the person, but involves also the gav, the back, the lower level, the shechem, the back of the person as well. So there's a relation between one person and another person, which is called a hug, an embrace. Then there's a deeper relationship with a person, which is called a kiss. And I'll tell you, when you kiss a person, it's a deep thing. You kiss a person on the lips. You don't give him a peck on the cheek. You kiss a person on the lips. It's a very deep connection. And if you don't want to do it, then you shouldn't. But when you kiss a person on the lips, it's a meaningful, it's a deeper thing. So the Rebbe says in Tanya, the deeper relationship with Yid and the Eibush is compared to a kiss. And now the Rebbe says the deepest relationship with the Eibush, the deepest of all, is called this Dapkas Rucha Baruch, which means the joining of neshamas, joining of spirits. Hugging is a physical act. Kissing is a physical act. Is Dapkas Rucha, joining spirit and spirit is sort of the idea that you feel what's going on in another person's heart. When you feel so connected to another person that you know what they're thinking, you know what they're feeling, this is called this Dapkas Rucha, a joining of spirits. So Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, and it's brought, of course, from earlier, I'm assuming, that in our relationship with the Eibush, there's a hug, where Hashem hugs us, where He takes us around completely, and we take Him around completely. Then there is a kiss, and then there is a joining of spirits. When you hug another person, you're very close to that person. When you hug another person, you're close not just to the things that are more important to that person, you're close to the things in that person that are not so important, which is represented by the fact that when you're hugging them, you're also hugging their back. But you're two separate people. You're just connected. You're just physically close, but you're two separate people. And the nimshal for a hug is mitzvahs. When we do a mitzvah, we're hugging Hashem. When we do a mitzvah, Hashem is hugging us. The connection, the experience with the Eibush is we're separate from Him. He's Him, we're us, and we're close. And I guess you could say when you hug a person, you sense that closeness. The Rebbe once spoke in the Sikha that when you put on the tefillin, you make them tight, give a pinch, so you feel like you're physically tying the mitzvah onto your body. You feel it. It physically affects you, but you remain separate from the mitzvah. It's like an embrace. What's a kiss? A kiss is learning Torah. Because the kiss is a much deeper connection, obviously. And when a person learns Torah, what they're doing in learning Torah is they're putting into their brain God's wisdom. One of the best ways to become close to another person is to be interested in what interests him. If you have a good friend and your good friend has a hobby, you want to know what that hobby is and you want to understand it. So you take your time, you take your energy to listen to what they're doing, to read what they're doing, to see what they're doing, to understand what they're doing, and then you're joining your mind with their mind. You're actually giving your brain to that person to allow his ideas to enter into your brain. You should understand what he understands and how he understands it and why he understands it. The proximity, the closeness between a person and a person. When I give you my brain to fill your ideas with my brain, into my brain, or vice versa, you give your brain to fill it with my ideas, it's a kiss. It's a much deeper bond than two people who are hugging each other. So a kiss is compared to mitzvahs, a hug is compared to mitzvahs, and a kiss is compared to Torah. The third relationship is called this Dapkas Rucha Baruch, the joining of spirits, where your neshama sort of feels the neshama of the other person, which is a very, very spiritual. How can you feel another person? It's a very spiritual thing. I'm just going to tell you a story. I tell the story so many times. I'm about to make a terrible, terrible confession. I believe the story is true. I hope the story is true. But I've told it so many times. It's a moedendike maaseh. It's a moedendike maaseh, but I've seen contradictions to the story. The story was that the Alter Rebbe had 3 daughters. His oldest daughter was Freidke. She's very, very famous. Her second daughter was Devoida Leah. She was even more famous. She was the Tzemach Tzedek's mother. She passed away at the age of 26. She gave up her life that Alter Rebbe should live. She made a bezdin paskin. Alter Rebbe saw that he was going to pass away because he was spreading too much chassidus. So she called in a bezdin and she made them paskin that she should die instead of her father, and she did. And she left over a little boy, the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Alter Rebbe promised to raise her. Alter Rebbe raised the Tzemach Tzedek like his own son, even though he was a grandson. Her name was Devoida Leah. Her husband's name was Shalom Shachner. Shalom Shachner Ibn Echad. If you open up the Tanya, in the Akdama, you'll see that Shalom Shachner Ibn Echad was one of the people who printed the first print of Tanya in Slavit, and Tov Nun Zayin with Shalom Shachner. He was no longer the Alter Rebbe's son-in-law. Alter Rebbe his daughter had passed away 5 years earlier. So there's a story. Why did the Alter Rebbe select Reb Shalom Shachner, the son-in-law, for his daughter Dvei Leah was not a normal woman. She was a gedola. Had she been a man, she'd have been a rebbe. She was, the Alter Rebbe's third daughter. Her name was Rachel. Apparently, she was what we would call a normal person. But the older two daughters were saints. They were godly women. They were gedolim. You want to say something?
Yeah, he was still the Alter Rebbe's son-in-law, right?
He remarried. He had more children. Tzemach Tzedek had half brothers and sisters. But anyway, so this is the story that goes around. That the Alter Rebbe was a chassid by his Rebbe. Alter Rebbe had three Rebbes: the Mizitcher Magid, Avram the Angel, and then the Menachem Mendel of Horodok, who was the third Rebbe. That one Friday night, the Alter Rebbe was sitting by his Rebbe, Menachem Mendel of Horodok, and suddenly the Menachem Mendel of Horodok says the most eerie thing. This Reb Noach, the father of Shalom Shachner, was on a ship traveling from Turkey, from Istanbul to Haifa, on the Mediterranean Sea. He was on Shabbos, Friday night. And the ship capsized, and he was drowning. And the Mendel Horodok is telling the Chassidim sitting at the table what's happening in real time. It's happening right this minute. At the Mendel's ship, the Noach's ship just capsized, and he's drowning, and Reb Noach was called to the Beis Din Shel Maalah. And he was given two choices. One choice is that he should suffer now, he should die slowly, and then he should go straight to Gan Eden. The other choice is that he should not suffer, he should die immediately, and then he'll be judged and go to Gehenna. And Reb Noach said, I need to ask my Rebbe. The Mendel Horodok is telling the story as it's happening. So the Beis Din Shel Maalah told Reb Noach, it doesn't exactly work this way. When you're on this side of the fence, you do what we want. So Reb Noach says, I never did anything without asking my Rebbe. I want to ask my Rebbe now. So the Beis Din Shel Maalah said, if that's a fact, if you never did anything without asking your Rebbe, we'll let you ask him now. And they determined that he had never done anything without asking his Rebbe. So they gave him permission to ask the Mendel of Vitebsk, should I drown slowly and suffer and then die in agony and I go straight to Gan Eden, or should I die immediately and then be judged by the Shemaila? And the Mendel sitting by his table in Vitebsk, in Europe, and he's repeating this to the Chassidim, and he says, and I told him he should suffer. He should not die immediately, he should drown slowly and be spared the Elam Habur, the Gehenna. So the Mendel Horodok tells the Chassidim what just happened across this. This is a story that it can keep you up for many, many Friday nights. It's a very eerie story. And the Chassidim sitting at the table suddenly hear his voice. And he cries out, I Rebbe. They heard Reb Noach, they knew his voice, he was a chassid. They heard his voice, I Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe was sitting there. And the Alter Rebbe said, such a chassid, I want his children for my children. This such is Dabkas Rucha Brucha. It's a connection of a neshama and a neshama. Alter Rebbe was sitting there. He was a chassid of the Mendel Vitebsk, and he heard the Reb Noach cry. As he comes gesehen for Green-Glass. Rabbi Nir tells the story, and it's in a sefer. I saw a video of the story that Reb Noach cried. All the chassidim heard him say, "I Rebbe." So what was it? He was a big Talmud Chacham. I'm sure he was, but that wasn't why. He was a big Yirei Shamayim. I'm sure he was. That wasn't why. The Alter Rebbe wanted him for a son-in-law because he saw his kashrus, the bond between one soul and another, soul of a chazan and soul of a Rebbe. That's a type of Stavkas Rucha Berucha. Now, in terms of Yiddishkeit, this is what's called Primus HaTeira, the Neshama of Teira. We call Kabbalah, Chassidus. It means the godliness of Teira. There's a whole philosophy how to explain it, but you don't have time to do. So there's a hug and there's a kiss and there's a joining of spirits. Okay? Kahas represents the kiss, and on a much higher level, Kahas represents the joining of spirits. Gershon represents the hug. In other words, Gershon and Kahas represent Yiddishkeit. Kahas represents the depth of Yiddishkeit, and Gershon represents what's called the actionability, the practical side of Yiddishkeit. In this Maimer that I learned Shabbos, the Rebbe makes an interesting argument. The Rebbe says we're now in Golus. Most mitzvahs I say we cannot do. Most mitzvahs Leisa say we can keep. The Rebbe says, I propose that there should be Nesiyas Reish only for Gershon. We should only lift up Gershon's head. We shouldn't lift up Kahas's head, because Kahas's business may be a higher business, but it's a much less practical business. And that's what the Rebbe explains, why the Chazal say, Mishum Kavod HaTeira. The emes is you should only lift up Gershon, because Gershon represents Judaism on an actionable level that we can relate. What we're calling in this little conversation here, the idea of a hug. Kahas represents a kiss. Kahas represents the joining of spirits. These are very high levels, which are not for every person. So the Maimer suggests maybe we should only lift up Bnei Gershon. We say, no, We lift up B'nai Kahas also because Mishum covered that Teda out of respect for the Teda. So where's Merari? If Gershon is the hug, and Kahas is the kiss and the joining of spirits, where's Merari? So the Maimorim says look at the Teda in Pachas Nasei, and there brings it in his Maimin. Merari is the word, Meridus, bitterness. Merari represents Leiv Nishba V'nidga, the broken heart. Merari is not Judaism. It's a Jew, it's a person. It's the broken heartedness of a Yid. That's what Merari means. There's of course 101 different models for Merari. And one of them is, the Maimonides bring the example, Shikhi Amecha Beisavich, that if you want to be a Jew, you have to forget all of your material concerns just to focus on Hashem. Or to use an expression which you know from the Mishnayos, Ein Eimdim L'Spalel Ela Mitoich Koived Roish, before a person davens has to be a bitterness. When you daven, it's an Eimdim L'Spalel Ela Mitoich Simcha. Judaism, Teirah, mitzvahs, tefillah have to be done b'simcha, but before you daven, there's a bitterness. Merari represents this. Merari represents before I actually connect to Hashem, there's a bitterness, a brokenness, a bitterness. So Merari doesn't get lifted up. You know why? Not because he doesn't deserve to be lifted up. Because his inyan is not to be lifted up, his inyan is to be broken. Nasa Yisreish, you raise up the head of Kahas, you raise up the head of Gershon. The whole inyan of Merari is that he doesn't raise his head. The whole inyan of Merari is the brokenness, the foundation, the Leiv Nishba V'nidga, the broken-heartedness. They tell a story, the Frierdiker Rebbe. It's worth to have this whole shia just me to remember and to tell you this Maaseh. I believe I know the person with whom the Maaseh happened, but I don't remember her name exactly. She was a Gerari from home, but I forgot who her married name was. She was a Gerari. They say she was a Vamgarza Schwester Dachsmer. She was a big Chassidah, and she used to go into the Frierdiker Rebbe to Yechidus, and the Frierdiker Rebbe gave her a lot of time. With her. And the Frierdiker Rebbe's secretary was really upset about it. The Frierdiker Rebbe's time was very measured, and this woman would come in and sit, and the Rebbe would talk to her, and she came in often, I don't know, a couple times a year maybe. The Rebbe gave her a lot of attention. So I don't know how it came out, but the Frierdiker Rebbe said to his secretary, on one occasion when he tried to interrupt the Rebbe sitting with this woman, the Rebbe told him these words: Sie is alev nishbar, ich bin alev nishbar. Beide unsere Neshamas nehmen sich von demselben Hegel. She's a broken-hearted woman. I'm a broken-hearted person. Both of our souls come from the same place in Gan Eden. I have kinship with her. Why am I spending more? I relate to her, she relates to Alev Nishbar, the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe called it Alev Nishbar. There's a letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe to the Rebbe. I'm not going to tell you all the details now because I don't have time. But the Rebbe asked the Frierdiker Rebbe to do something for him. I'll tell you what it was, to become chief rabbi of Paris. There was a proposal to make a more Haredi, a more frum community. The Orthodox community in Paris is very modern. And there was a proposal to make a much more traditional community. And they offered the Rabbanos Harashos of Paris to the Rebbe. The Ar Rebbe. And the Frierdiker Rebbe writes to the Rebbe and the Rebbe Chaim Mushka, begging them, it's a printed letter, to take the job. And he says, please think it over carefully and decide between yourselves. And if you'll decide in the affirmative, you'll bring a little nachas to my broken heart. It's written so painfully. So you read it and you ask yourself, how could the Rebbe have not done it? You bring a little joy to mine to broken hearts. Frierdiker Rebbe didn't have a good day in his life. I'm assuming that the Rebbe didn't take it because the idea fell through. Not that the Rebbe turned it down. The whole endeavor, the whole effort at making a Haredi community in Paris just didn't happen. But imagine Frierdiker Rebbe writes, please think about it, and when you'll choose in the affirmative that you'll take the position, you'll give me a little nachas. I'm a broken man. Merari represents Leiv, the brokenheartedness. The brokenheartedness is not Yiddishkeit. It's a Yid. Now, of course, we live in America. And because we live in America, we talk a lot about self-esteem. But you know why we talk a lot about self-esteem in America? Because we have a problem with self-esteem. There is a sense of tzbrachenkeit. I gave a shir in the morning to the boys, Nanila Deidi, we talked about it. We have the biggest nisyonis in the history of mankind. Our generation, you, I, but much more you're younger than I am, face tests that no generation of Jews ever faced. How does the Eibishter expect us to deal with these tests? How are we supposed to possibly survive these nisyonis? How? So I saw the Maimer, and I learned it with the boys in the morning. Where the Frierdiker Rebbe says that the generations of the neshamas before Mashiach have very, very, very low gufim, very low bodies, very, very coarse bodies. And therefore they have very, very sensitive souls. That's what he writes. We have very high neshamas. I believe me, you don't even have to justify disagreeing, because it's only a pshetel, it's not a... I believe that the source of our low self-esteem is this sensitivity. The neshamas of our generation are unbelievably sensitive. And because of that sensitivity, everything hurts us. And that hurt expressed itself in feeling inadequate, in a brokenness. And that brokenness counterbalances, that brokenness gives us an ability to offset the tests that the Eibusha gave us. If we had powerful neshamas, we'd all be Elazar ben Dordayas. We'd all be the biggest sinners in the world. This is what Merari represents. Merari does not get lifted up. Not because he doesn't get deserved to lift up. That's not his inyan. His inyan is the brokenheartedness, which is the foundation. Before you practice davening, before you practice learning, before you practice doing mitzvahs, which are gifts that the Eibishter gave us, there is you. And in every year there is a sense of tzabrochenkait, of brokenheartedness, which makes us a keli to have a relationship with the Eibishter. The famous story with the Rebbe Marash, which everybody knows. No, with the Rebbe Rashab. A man came to Lubavitch the very, very first year of the Rebbe Rashab in the Siyas. He had a very big problem. Maybe he had no children, or somebody was very ill. He went into the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbe Rashab told him in one way or another that he couldn't help him. The guy was not a Yechidus, and he was so upset, he started to cry, became hysterical. The Rebbe's brother, the Razal, was there, the Rebbe's older brother, Rebbe Zalman. And he sees this Yid so upset. So he goes over to his brother and says, why is this Jew so upset? So he says, so the Rebbe Rashab says, because he came in and he asked me for something and I wasn't able to help him, so he's very broken. And he tells you, what's going on. The man is mamish tzebrochen legamri. He's completely shattered. So the Rebbe says, yeah, he's broken. Yeah. Send him back in. Send him back in. So he came back into the Rebbe, and whatever bracha he wanted, he gave him. Whatever bracha he gave him, he got. So the Rebbe said, what's this? I don't understand you. So the Rebbe said, in order for him to get that bracha, he had to be a keli. In order to have that keli, you need to be a leiv nishbat. He had to appreciate what he's asking of the Eibishter. He needed to be tachnunim. You want something from God, and you ask him for it. You have to, there's a brokenness that comes, there's a pain, there's a heaviness, there's a sadness, there's a feeling of, I'm helpless, I need Hashem's help. That's the keli for the bracha. That's Merari. So the sub-tribe of Levi, which is called Merari, is not lifted up. The Eibishter's name is not mentioned, because they're not learning Torah. They're not hugging the Eibishter, they're not kissing the Eibishter, they're not joining spirits of the Eibishter. They represent the very foundation. That at the base and the heart of a Jew there's a brokenness. And there's a Yiddish expression. It's very difficult to translate into English, but that there are three ironies, there are three things which are counterintuitive. Nicht doch kein krummere Sach wie gleiche Leiter. Nicht doch kein gleichere Sach wie krummen Leiter. Nicht doch kein krummere Sach wie gleich Wertel. Und nicht doch kein ganzere Sach wie zerbrochene Herz. You translate this in English, you kill it, but basically it means there is nothing more straight than a ladder that's crooked. And there's nothing more crooked than when you say something which sounds cute that's cynical. And there's nothing more whole than a broken heart. That's an old Chassidish expression. In Tanakh it says, right, everybody knows the first half of the pasuk. Nobody knows the second half of the pasuk. Sheikhin ad morim v'kodesh shmei. What's next? Right? Hashem says, I have nothing to do with the world. I'm no place, nothing to do with the world. And when somebody is broken and somebody is crushed, that's where I am. The Eibishter is found by the Tzabroch and Ahatz. That's what Merari is. They're a subsection of Shevet Levi. Their heads are not lifted. When Aaron HaKohen raised them up, it doesn't mention the Eibishter's name. Because they don't represent the relationship with the Eibishter. They represent what the Jew is. That's the basis for the relationship. So what I want to propose, what I want to spin, in other words, what's my shiur for tonight? When you read about Kahas and Gershna Merari, And you had it in Parshas Bamidbar, you have it in Parshas Nosa, you have it again now, and you're going to have it in Kairach, when Kairach makes a whole revolution, and over there Kohath shows what happens when you become too holy and too smart and too sophisticated. You can end up under the ground, Kipshute. Yeah, it's not fair. Merari does not entitled to have his head lifted. When Aaron HaKohen picks him up, he's not picking up the Eibush, he's Stamazai picking him up. So Bepashtus, yeah, he wasn't involved in holy things. But Bamitis on Yodim, the Avoida Hezber is the reason Merari is not identified as doing holy work. The reason Merari is not identified as being raised up and having a better hug, a deeper kiss, or more meaningful connection of spirits is because he represents, to use the cliche, the farther away from God I am, the closer I am. The brokenness, the Lenishba V'nitke. That's the theme, that's the Indian of Shevet Merari. And what I want to say is that in Hasidus it says always, from one point of view you say, Gadol mitzvah v'eisa, v'misha eini mitzvah v'eisa. Right? A person does a mitzvah because he was told to do it, gets more schad than a person does it on his own. It's human nature. If you choose to put on tefillin, you do it with a cheshek. The minute God tells you to do it, you're not interested. And that's why it's harder. And that's why being a Jew is by doing the mitzvah that Hashem gave us, like it says in Tanya Perek Lamed Hey. But there's another side to that coin. The other side of that coin is those things in Judaism which are b'chlal not mitzvahs are considered the highest. Kol ma'asecha yiyu l'shem shamayim. Everything you do is for the sake of heaven. B'chol, you're going to work, you're playing a game, you're going to Six Flags, and you do it in a way of the Ehu. You do it in a way of l'shem shamayim. You're just having fun, which you're entitled to do. But there is a sense that a Jew is different than a non-Jew, and the way you entertain yourself reflects that. There's an argument to be made. The Rebbe says in his Maimonim that that's higher than the relationship with the Eibishter based on the commandments of the hug, which is the mitzvahs, and the kiss, which is the Torah, etc. And that's what Merari is. Merari is the idea that the relationship between Yidden and Hashem are not only because of the Torah and mitzvahs that the Eibishter gave us, it's because of who we are. And that part of the relationship is a tzabrochenkait, it's a brokenheartedness. And brokenheartedness is broken. It's not fun. But that's where our emes is. Our emes is in our brokenheartedness. The Rebbe Marash said, it's a quote I think in Hayem Yem. A krechts van a Yidden is tshuva law. If a Jew says, oi, a Jew has pain, and he expresses that pain with a sigh, it's considered the highest love of. Now, the Rebbe Marash doesn't say why he krechtzes. He may have krechts because he didn't win the lottery. He may have krechts because his ball team lost a game. A krechts van a Yidden is tshuva law. When a Jew demonstrates pain and inadequacy, there is something incredibly genuine about it. And the Eibishter says, that's where I am. You want to know where the Eibishter is? In the brokenhearted. That's Merari. So what I want to underscore is, I started the class by saying, it's taka not fair. Merari is not treated with the same reverence as Kohas and Gershon. And I said it very plainly. Parody is a fantasy. It's just not real. It's a socialist idea. It's a fantasy. It's wishing. Parody is a terrible thing. There needs to be competition. I'm going to say it. People need to be tough. People need to be jealous of each other. They need to compete with each other. Let's say, let's be nice. Civilizations can't live that way. But it's also true that the one on the lowest madrega, the underprivileged, right? The Gemara says, be careful of the children of poor people. That's where the Torah of the next generation will come. Not from the sons of the Rosh Yeshiva, from the Bnei Aniyim, Azay the Metzias. That's what Merari represents. Mordechai Dober, right?
Yeah, I was going to say something.
Say it.
What is the most sincere feeling that people get?
In relation with Hashem? Oh, if you're talking in general, talking about human relationships, that's a very hard question to answer. The most sincere, wow. Maybe compassion, to feel bad. I would say that you feel compassion more sincerely than you would feel even love. Now, of course, no feeling is more sincere than hatred. That you really mean it, yeah? Or anger, yeah? But in terms, I would argue that probably the most sincere human emotion, certainly for a Jew, is compassion. But in our relationship with Hashem, it's submission. It's not understanding, it's not feeling, it's accepting. Okay, it's Ava Ma'arif.